They laughed at her like she didn't belong until the will was read and the truth silenced every voice in the room. Emma was not the kind of girl people noticed. She worked at a small diner in a quiet town, wearing the same few outfits, keeping her head down, and smiling at every customer who came in. Life had never been easy for her. Her mother died when she was just a child, and she never knew her father. After that, she had been passed from one foster home to another, until finally, a kind woman named Margaret took her in. Margaret didn't have much, but she gave Emma love, warmth, and everything she could afford. Emma never forgot that. She helped with chores, studied hard, and got a job as soon as she turned 16 to help pay the bills. She never talked much about her family. People sometimes asked her if she had any relatives, and she would just shake her head or say, "Not really." What most people didn't know was that Emma actually came from a very wealthy family. Her grandfather, Charles Whitmore, was one of the richest men in the city. He owned companies, buildings, cars, even a vineyard. His name was printed on the front page of newspapers, and people treated him like royalty. But Emma had never spoken to him in her life. Her mother had been his only daughter. But after she married a man Charles disapproved of, he cut her off. He told her to never come back. When Emma was born, Charles didn't visit. When her mother died, he didn't attend the funeral. He sent no letters, no money, no message. It was like he had erased them from his world. Emma grew up hearing little bits and pieces about him, but never let herself care. He was a stranger to her, just a name. Then one morning, something strange happened. Emma had just finished her shift at the diner. Her hands smelled like bacon and coffee, and she was so tired she could barely stand. She was wiping the counter when the door opened, and a man in a black suit walked in. He looked completely out of place. Clean shoes, neat tie, shiny watch. He sat at the counter, looked at her, and asked softly, "Are you Emma Whitmore?" She blinked. "Yeah. Why?" He handed her a white envelope. It was thick and heavy, and the name on it was written in golden letters. "I'm sorry for your loss," the man said, then quietly walked out. Emma opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a formal invitation to the reading of a will. The name at the top made her heart stop. Charles Whitmore. Her grandfather was dead. She stared at the paper in shock. For a few minutes, she couldn't even think clearly. Why was she being invited? Was this some kind of mistake? She showed it to Margaret, who looked just as surprised. "Maybe." "He left you something," she said gently. But Emma laughed. "Why would he? He never even spoke to me." Still, something inside her was curious. She had no money for a fancy dress or expensive shoes, so she wore her Bastan old navy blue dress she had worn to church last Christmas in simple flats that hurt her feet. Margaret offered to go with her, but Emma said no. "I'll be fine," she smiled. "It's probably nothing." The Whitmore estate was huge. She had seen pictures of it on the internet once. A massive white mansion with tall pillars trimmed, hedges, fountains, and shiny cars parked out front. When she stepped out of the taxi, her breath caught. Everything looked like a movie. People in designer clothes stood at the door, talking and sipping drinks. No one looked at her. She walked past them quietly, her small bag clutched tightly in her hand. Inside the grand hall, people were gathered in leather chairs, murmuring to each other. Emma recognized some faces from newspaper photos. One woman wore a large hat and too much perfume. A man with slick-back hair tapped his fingers impatiently. A boy around her age chewed gum and laughed loudly at something someone said. She walked to a corner and sat down quietly. No one greeted her. In fact, when a few people did glance her way, they raised their eyebrows as if wondering what she was doing there. One man leaned in and whispered something to a woman beside him, and they both chuckled. Emma tried not to listen. A few minutes later, the lawyer arrived, a tall, serious-looking man with a black briefcase. He cleared his throat and introduced himself as Mr. Hargrove. Everyone went quiet, sat at the head of the room, and opened the file in front of him. As you all know, Mr. Charles Whitmore passed away peacefully in his sleep. This reading is to share his last will and testament, as written and signed 6 months before his passing. Everyone leaned forward slightly, Emma sat still, heart thudding in her chest. Mr. Hargrove began reading. The first few parts were simple his artwork to his niece, his vineyard to his younger brother, shares of different companies to various cousins and nephews. People nodded as if they had expected this. One man even smiled proudly and whispered, "Knew it." Then Mr. Hargrove said, "To Miss Emma Whitmore." Do-do-do-do-do. The room froze for a second. Then someone in the back let out a short laugh. Another person coughed, clearly hiding a chuckle. A woman near the front whispered, "What for?" Old man barely knew her. A younger man behind Emma muttered, "Maybe she's getting a sweater." Emma kept her eyes on the floor, her cheeks burned. She wanted to leave. She didn't want anything from these people. Mr. Hargrove looked up from the paper and narrowed his eyes at the people around him. He didn't say anything yet, just stared. Then he closed the will slowly and said, "There is one final document. I've been instructed to read, but only under a certain condition." Everyone looked confused. "This part of the will is sealed and private. Mr. Whitmore asked me to read it only if Miss Emma Whitmore was present in this room." People began to murmur again. Some turned their heads to look at Emma, suddenly paying attention to her for the first time. The woman with the large hat said loudly, "You've got to be kidding. This is ridiculous." Mr. Hargrove ignored them. He stood up slowly, holding a thick sealed envelope. "What I'm about to read," he said, "will change everything." Emma's heart skipped a beat. She had no idea what was coming, but the way everyone stared at her now, it felt like the whole room had just shifted. For the first time in her life, she wasn't invisible. But it didn't feel good. It felt dangerous. The lawyer broke the seal. Emma sat up a little straighter. She didn't know it yet, but this would be the moment her entire life would change. And the people who had laughed at her were about to regret every single second of it. The air inside the grand room became thick with tension. Everyone sat upright, curious now, some even slightly nervous. The laughing had stopped. The smirks had faded. Mr. Hargrove, the lawyer, held the sealed envelope with steady hands, his voice calm but firm as he spoke again. Mr. Charles Whitmore left behind a final message. It was to be opened only if Miss Emma Whitmore attended this reading. Since she is here today, I will now read his private instructions to all of you. Some people shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. The woman in the big hat crossed her arms. The young man who had joked earlier was no longer laughing. Emma, sitting quietly in her seat, felt her heart pounding so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. She didn't know what to expect. A letter? A few kind words? Photo? Why had her grandfather, a man she had never met, left something for her? Mr. Hargrove opened the envelope slowly with care and pulled out a few neatly folded pages. He took a deep breath before beginning to read. "To my family, and especially to my granddaughter Emma Whitmore," he read aloud. "If you are hearing this, it means I have already left this world. I have lived a long life, full of success, failure, mistakes, and lessons. But the greatest mistake I ever made was turning my back on my daughter and on Emma, her child." A few people gasped quietly. The woman in the hat looked stunned. Emma's eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. "I let pride rule me," the letter continued. "I let anger poison my heart. My daughter loved a man I didn't approve of, and instead of trusting her, I punished her. I punished her by cutting her off, by pretending she no longer existed. When she died, I didn't attend her funeral. I told myself it wasn't my place. But the truth is, I was too ashamed, too broken, and by then it was too late." The room had fallen completely silent, but I started thinking about Emma. The lawyer read on. "I started wondering where she was, what kind of life she had, who was taking care of her. I hired a private investigator, quietly. I didn't want her to know. I was too cowardly to face her. But what I learned about Emma changed everything." Emma sat frozen. She had no idea her grandfather had ever cared, no idea he had searched. For her, Mr. Hargrove kept reading. "Emma, I learned that you were living with a woman named Margaret, someone with very little money, but a very big heart. I read that you worked long shifts in a diner, that you went to community college, that You helped feed your neighbors when they had no food. I even visited your diner once." Emma gasped. Her hands flew to her mouth. "I came in pretending to be a poor old man," the letter said. "You gave me a bowl of soup. You smiled at me. You asked me if I was okay. I was wearing torn clothes and looked like I hadn't showered. Still, you treated me like a human being, like family. You reminded me of everything I lost when I pushed my daughter away, and you didn't even know who I was." A few people in the room looked away, ashamed. "After that, I made my decision," the letter continued. "I decided that you, Emma, would be the one to carry forward my legacy, not because of your last name, but because of your heart." The room shook with shock. There were gasps, murmurs, and one man even stood up in protest. "This is ridiculous," he shouted. "Shh! Not even part of this family?" "She's nothing but sit down," Mr. Hargrove said sharply, his voice cold for the first time. "You'll want to hear the rest." The man sat, but his face was red with anger. Mr. Hargrove cleared his throat and continued. "Therefore, I, Charles Whitmore, leave the majority of my estate, including my properties, business shares, bank accounts, and personal assets, to my granddaughter Emma Whitmore, effective immediately." No one could speak. Emma sat motionless, unable to believe what she had just heard. The lawyer kept reading the details. Emma was now the sole owner of the family mansion, the vineyard, the antique cars, the art collection, and over $40 million in cash and stocks, all under her name. Aunt Clara fainted. The cousin who had joked earlier started yelling, "This can't be real. He must have been tricked. This is fraud." Mr. Hargrove calmly handed out copies of the legal documents. Every paper was signed, stamped, and recorded in front of witnesses. There was no mistake. Still, the room broke into chaos. One woman stormed toward Emma and shouted, "You manipulated him. You got into his head." Another yelled, "This is our family's money, not yours." Emma stood up slowly, tears in her eyes. "I never even knew him," she said, her voice shaking. "I never asked for any of this." But they didn't listen. Their words were filled with jealousy and rage. Even people who had never spoken to her were now shouting at her like she was a criminal. One man tried to grab the papers from the lawyer, but a security guard stepped in. "Enough," Mr. Hargrove shouted. "If any of you continue this behavior, I will be forced to call the police. This reading is over. You may leave." Some people stayed seated, stunned and bitter. Others stomped out, slamming the door. Emma stood there, overwhelmed, not knowing what to do. She had walked into the room thinking she'd be ignored. Instead, she had been given everything. Mr. Hargrove walked over to her. "Your grandfather may have made many mistakes," he said gently, "but this was the one thing he wanted to make right. He believed in you, Emma, even if he couldn't say it in person." Emma nodded slowly. I don't understand." "Why?" "Because you were kind," he said. "Even when you didn't have to be. That meant more to him than you'll ever know." She left the mansion that day not with pride, but with confusion and a heavy heart. She wasn't sure what came next. She still had to wake up the next morning, work a shift, help Margaret with groceries. But now, everything was different. Everyone who had laughed at her was now left with nothing, and the girl they once mocked. She was now the heir to a fortune she never wanted, but even she didn't yet know how much her life was about to change. Emma couldn't sleep that night. She lay in her small bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the ticking of the clock on the wall. Margaret had made her warm tea and sat with her, holding her hand, but even Margaret couldn't understand what Emma was feeling inside. It wasn't just Shakit. It was fear, confusion, and a strange emptiness. She was rich now, unbelievably rich, but she didn't feel happy. She felt like her quiet life had been broken open, like she was standing in the middle of a crowd where everyone was yelling her name. All night her phone buzzed with unknown numbers. Reporters wanted interviews. Old classmates sent fake congratulations. People who had ignored her before were now trying to talk like they were close friends. Even the diner owner called and asked if she was still going to work her morning shift. Emma didn't know how to answer. She wasn't the same girl from yesterday, but she didn't know who she was now. The next day, Mr. Hargrove, the lawyer, came to see her. He met her in the small kitchen where she and Margaret sat with toast and eggs. "You don't have to accept everything," he said kindly, "but the documents are legal and binding. The estate is yours. Properties, the accounts, even the mansion." "I don't want a mansion," Emma said quickly. "I don't even want a big house. I just want peace." Mr. Hargrove nodded. "That's exactly why your grandfather chose you." Then he handed her a flash drive. "Your grandfather recorded a video for you. He wanted you to see it in private." Emma's hands trembled as she took it. After the lawyer left, she went to her room, closed the door, and plugged the drive into her small laptop. The screen turned black for a moment, then slowly faded into an image of an old man sitting in a leather chair. He looked tired, but calm. His eyes were sharp, but gentle. "Emma," he said, looking directly into the camera, "if you're watching this, it means I'm gone. I've made many mistakes in my life, but ignoring you and your mother was the worst of them all."
Emma's
Eyes filled with tears as he spoke. "I watched you from a distance," he continued. "I saw how hard you worked. I saw how you treated people with kindness when you had nothing yourself. I visited your diner once, pretending to be poor, just to see what kind of person you were. And you, without knowing who I was, gave me food, asked me how I was doing, and treated me with more dignity than most of my own children have ever shown to anyone." He took a deep breath before continuing. "I want you to have everything I've built, not just to give you comfort, but because I know you'll do the right thing with it. You're not greedy, Emma. You're strong, kind, and thoughtful. And this family needs someone like you to lead, even if they don't realize it yet." Emma covered her mouth with her hand. She had never heard someone speak about her like that. "In my will," he said, "I made it clear that if you came to the reading, no matter how they treated you, then everything would go to you. I knew they would laugh at you. I knew they would mock you, but I also knew you wouldn't walk away. Braver than they are." He smiled softly, then the screen faded to black dot. Emma sat frozen, tears silently falling down her cheeks. That same day, Emma was asked to return to the Whitmore estate to begin the legal transfer of ownership. When she arrived, many of the same family members who had laughed at her were there, but this time no one laughed. Their faces were stiff, eyes full of bitterness. Some ignored her. Others pretended to smile. Her cousin Mark approached her first. He had been the loudest critic during the will reading. "Hey, Emma," he said, his tone too friendly. "Crazy couple of days, huh? Look, we got off on the wrong foot. I didn't realize Grandpa loved you so much. Maybe we can grab coffee sometime? Talk about the estate?" Emma looked at him, and for a moment she saw the desperation behind his smile. She nodded politely, but said nothing. She didn't trust any of them. Inside the estate office, Mr. Hargrove went over all the details. Emma was now the legal owner of the mansion, the vineyard, several company shares, and over $40 million in cash and assets. He also handed her a set of notebooks that her grandfather had kept, journals full of thoughts, regrets, and ideas. Later, Emma walked around the mansion. Every room felt like it belonged to someone else. Fancy furniture, expensive art, crystal vases. It was beautiful, but cold. She didn't feel at home. She stood in front of a large portrait of Charles Whitmore, the man who had ignored her for so long and then changed everything. She decided not to stay in the mansion. Instead, she gave Margaret the master bedroom and told the staff that they were free to go if they wished. A few stayed, surprised by her kindness. One of the housekeepers, an older woman named Helen, had tears in her eyes. "Your grandfather used to sit in the garden, looking so sad," she said, "but he talked about you often near the end. Said you were the one good thing he still had hope for." Emma thanked her and asked if she would help her learn about the estate. She wanted to understand how it worked, what it needed, and how to take care of it. Helen agreed. In the next few days, Emma began receiving invitations from rich families, businessmen, and investors. They all wanted to meet the new Whitmore heiress. Some sent flowers, others sent gifts. But Emma didn't want their attention. She ignored most of them. Then came the calls from charities, from orphanages, from people in need who had heard her story. Emma didn't know what to do at first. But then she remembered Margaret. She remembered her old school. She remembered the kids who had no shoes, the neighbors who struggled to pay rent. So she made a plan. Emma visited the orphanage where she had once lived. She donated new beds, books, and food. She gave scholarships to students in her old high school. She started a program to support single mothers and foster families. She even helped rebuild a broken shelter for women escaping abuse. The media began calling her the kind heiress. But not everyone was happy. Back at the Whitmore mansion, the rest of the family grew restless. Some filed complaints. A few tried to challenge the will. One cousin even hired a lawyer, claiming Charles had been mentally unfit when he signed the papers. But the video, the documents, and the witnesses were all solid. The judge threw the case out. Emma remained calm through it all. She didn't respond. With anger, she just kept working quietly, helping others. Then one day something unexpected happened. She received a letter. It was from one of her cousins, a girl named Leila. They had never spoken much. Lila had been one of the quiet ones during the will reading, sitting in the back. The letter read, "Dear Emma, I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I didn't laugh at you, but I didn't speak up either. I was scared. I've seen how cruel this family can be. But you were brave and you did something none of us had the strength to do. I don't want anything from you. I just want to thank you for showing me what real dignity looks like. If you ever need a friend, I'd be proud to be one." Emma smiled for the first time in days. She folded the letter and placed it next to her grandfather's journals. In that moment, she realized something. The money, the houses, the attention, they weren't the real inheritance. The real gift her grandfather had left her was trust. He had trusted her to break the pattern, to be better than the rest. And now she was doing just that. The girl they laughed at had become the woman they could never forget, and she was just getting started. The days turned into weeks, and Emma slowly adjusted to her new life, though she still didn't feel fully comfortable with it. She now owned everything: the Whitmore mansion, the vineyard, the businesses, the bank accounts, but deep down, she still felt like the same girl who used to mop floors at the diner. Some nights she lay awake in the grand bedroom, staring at the ceiling and wondering why life had changed so suddenly. She hadn't asked for this, hadn't planned for it. All she had ever wanted was peace. Maybe a small home with a garden, a job that paid enough to support her and Margaret. But now she was running an empire. Every morning staff greeted her with nervous smiles, unsure how to behave around her. Emma, in her simple clothes, always said good morning, always asked how they were doing. She didn't bark orders or act proud. Instead, she sat down with Helen, the housekeeper, and asked for advice. She asked questions about the staff, the rules, even how the kitchen worked. She didn't want to change everything too fast. But while Emma tried to settle in, the rest of the family was still not over the shock. Her cousin Mark was the most vocal. He started spreading rumors saying Emma had manipulated their grandfather, that the video had been faked, that Emma had somehow pressured Charles into rewriting the will. He tried to rally other family members to his side. "She's not one of us," he kept saying. "She didn't grow up in the family. She doesn't know how to run things." Some listened to him. Others stayed silent. But Emma heard whispers. Wherever she went, even in public, strangers started looking at her differently. Some were curious, some jealous, some clearly hoping to get something from her. It was hard for Emma to trust anyone. Then, one morning, while she was walking in the garden behind the mansion, she saw something unusual. A group of men in suits were standing near the back gate, talking to a gardener. When they saw Emma, they quickly nodded and walked away. She found out later that they were property investors who had heard about her. They wanted to buy the land behind the mansion to build a hotel. They had already spoken to Mark and some other relatives who were trying to convince Emma to sell. But Emma didn't want to sell. The garden was her favorite place. Her grandfather had written about it in his journals, how he used to sit there and think about his mistakes. It was peaceful, full of old trees, quiet birds, and blooming flowers. That night, she called a family meeting. She invited every relative who had attended the will reading. Mose showed up, curious about what she had to say. They entered the grand dining hall, now filled with food and chairs. Emma stood at the head of the table, wearing a plain dress and no jewelry. "I know many of you don't agree with my grandfather's decision," she said calmly. "I know you expected something different, but he chose me, and I intend to respect his wishes." Some people looked away, others crossed their arms. "I also know there have been offers to buy parts of the estate." "I'm not selling anything," she continued. "This land is not just property, it's history, it's memory. It's something that money can't replace." Mark stood up. "You don't understand how this world works, Emma. You've been poor your whole life. That's why you're making emotional decisions. This is a business. You can't run it like a charity." Emma looked at him, calm but firm. "I don't want to run it like a charity or a business. I want to run it with heart. It's something this family has forgotten." The room was silent. Mark scoffed and sat down. But for the first time, he didn't argue back. After the meeting, a few people came up to her, quietly, some offering fake smiles. Others truly impressed by how she handled herself. Her cousin Lila, the one who had sent her the letter, hugged her. "You're stronger than all of them combined," she whispered, in the weeks that followed. Emma made big changes. She created a scholarship fund in her mother's name, open to students from poor backgrounds. She rebuilt the old community center in her hometown and hired local teachers to run free classes for children. She worked with Margaret to open a shelter for young girls who had no families. She named it Rose House, after her mother. And still, Emma refused to move into the wealthy circles that had suddenly opened up to her. She ignored invitations to parties, photo shoots, and magazine interviews. She only accepted one Request Stand interview with a small newspaper run by young women in her old neighborhood. They asked her what it felt like to go from being ignored to being in control. Emma smiled and said, "It feels like I'm still me, just with more responsibility." But behind the scenes, trouble was growing. Mark didn't give up. He began contacting lawyers again, trying to dig up anything that could be used to challenge the will. He searched for old documents, paid people to lie about Emma, even visited the diner where she used to work. But everything he tried failed. Every time he brought something to court, it was dismissed. Frustrated, he turned to the media. He gave a long interview on a talk show, pretending to be concerned for the Whitmore legacy. "Emma's a sweet girl," he said, "but she's not. Ready for this? She's already giving away millions, tearing down old systems, changing things my grandfather worked his whole life to build." He made Emma sound reckless. But people didn't believe him. The public loved Emma. She had helped. So many people so quietly that even newspapers started calling her the unexpected angel. One night, Emma watched the interview from the couch, wrapped in a blanket, sipping tea. Margaret sat beside her, shaking her head. "You don't have to fight back," Margaret said gently. "The truth will win." But Emma was tired. She wasn't angry, just exhausted. She hadn't taken a vacation. She had barely slept. She had been carrying the weight of her family's hatred, her new responsibilities, and the public eye all while trying to stay kind. Then something strange happened. One morning, Mr. Hargrove returned to the estate with a small package. "I found this in one of your grandfather's safe boxers," he said. He asked that it be delivered only after the estate had been fully transferred. Inside the box was a small velvet pouch, and inside the pouch was a silver locket. Emma opened it. On one side was a picture of her mother holding baby Emma. On the other side was a note written in her grandfather's handwriting. It said, "I may not have held you when you were born, but I hold you now in every choice I've made. Forgive me." Charles. Emma held the locket tightly in her hands. In that quiet moment, all the pain, the anger, the confusion, everything washed over her. She finally cried, not because she was hurt, but because she was healing. From that day on, Emma stopped worrying about Mark. She stopped checking the news. She stopped asking if people liked her or approved of her. She knew who she was now. Just a waitress, not just a forgotten granddaughter. She was Emma Whitmore, and she was exactly where she was meant to be. Emma stood in the garden as the wind gently moved through the trees. The leaves danced softly, and birds chirped in the distance. She held the silver locket in her hand, the one with the note from her grandfather. Every time she opened it, she remembered his final words, "Forgive me." And somehow, she had. Lowly in her own way, she had forgiven him. Even though he hadn't been there when she needed him, he had tried to make things right in the end. And that meant something. Not everything, but something. Her life had changed in ways she never could have imagined. She was now the head of a powerful legacy, yet she still kept the same morning habits. She woke up early, drank tea with Margaret, and read from her grandfather's journals. She met with the staff, walked the garden, and took long drives through the countryside. The more time passed, the more she understood the weight she carried. But instead of letting it crush her, she let it guide her. Emma used the Whitmore name not to show power, but to help those who needed it most. She started visiting schools, encouraging children to believe in themselves even if no one else did. She gave out books, clothes, and school supplies in places where people had forgotten to care. She created job programs for women who had suffered abuse. She paid for elderly neighbors to get their medications and hospital care. She even returned to the diner she used to work at and gave it a full renovation, new kitchen, new tables, even health benefits for the staff. The community began to see her not as the rich girl who inherited a fortune, but as the girl who never forgot where she came from. But the road wasn't always easy. There were still people who didn't like her. There were still whispers from old family members, still rumors in newspapers. Some called her lucky, others called her a fraud. But Emma didn't waste time defending herself anymore. She had realized something very important. She didn't need their approval. She knew who she was, and that was enough. One morning, while sitting in the study, Emma received a call from Mr. Hargrove. "There's something you should see," he said. A few hours later, he arrived at the estate with a small folder in his hands. He handed it to her with a serious look. Emma opened it carefully. Inside were documents, letters, and old papers from her grandfather's earlier years. Some of them were written by her mother. Emma's hands trembled as she read them. They were filled with emotion, regret, love, and hope. Her mother had written to her father many times, asking for peace, asking for understanding. "I want you to meet your granddaughter," one letter said. "You'd be proud of her. She's bright, kind, and gentle." But Charles had never responded. He had kept the letters, though hidden away, locked in a safe. Emma's eyes filled with tears. All those years her mother had tried to make peace. All those years her grandfather had stayed silent. Mr. Hargrove sat quietly across from her. "I think he read those letters many times," he said. "Maybe that's why he chose you." He finally understood what he had lost. Emma nodded slowly. She couldn't change the past, but she could build a better future. And that's exactly what she was doing. Not long after, Emma decided to host an event at the Whitmore estate. It wasn't for rich investors or old family members. It was for the people she had helped: the single mothers, the students, the orphanage workers, the teachers, the nurses, the waitresses. She wanted them to see that they mattered. She wanted them to feel seen, respected, and valued. On the day of the event, the estate was filled with laughter, music, and joy. Children played in the garden, parents danced on the lawn, and old friends hugged one another. Tables were full of food, all cooked by local chefs Emma had supported. Even the woman who had once shared a room with Emma in the orphanage came. Now a social worker helping other kids, Emma stood at the front, looking over the crowd. For the first time in a long time, she felt peace. This moment was worth everything. Margaret stood beside her, holding her hand proudly. "Your mother would have been so proud," she said softly. Emma smiled. "I hope so." Then, as the sun began to set, a familiar face appeared in the crowd. It was Lila. Her cousin, the only one from the family who had been kind from the beginning. Lila walked up shyly and hugged Emma. "I wanted to say thank you," Lila said. "You didn't have to invite me." Emma smiled warmly. "You were the only one who didn't laugh." They walked together for a while, talking about their childhoods, their dreams, and how strange life could be. Lila told her how she had started studying social work, inspired by Emma's journey. "I used to think I had to marry rich, or act fake to be successful," Leela said. But you showed me something different. Emma was happy to hear that. She didn't need her family's love. But knowing she had helped even one person see the world differently, that meant everything. As the sky turned orange and pink, Emma made a quiet promise to herself. She would continue her grandfather's legacy, not the legacy of wealth and power, but the legacy of change, of kindness, of second chances. And then came one final twist. Weeks later, Emma received a visit from a man in his 50s. He stood at the door nervously, holding a worn-out cap. "Are you Emma?" he asked. "Yes," she said gently. I think I might be your uncle." Emma was surprised. She invited him in, and they sat in the kitchen. He explained that he was Charles' son from an earlier relationship, someone the family had kept hidden. Someone who had left home when he was young and never returned. He had been living a quiet life, working on boats and traveling. When he heard the news about Charles and the will, he didn't come forward. He said he didn't want anything. "I just wanted to meet you," he said, "because I heard about what you've done, and I thought, maybe it runs in the blood after all." Emma smiled softly. "Maybe it does." She gave him some tea, and they talked for hours. It felt like a new door had opened a part of her family she didn't even know existed. And this time, it wasn't about money. It was about connection. Time passed, and Emma continued to grow into her role, not as a rich girl, not as a businesswoman, but as a leader with a heart. The same people who had once laughed at her now respected her. Some even apologized. Most simply faded away, embarrassed by their actions. But Emma didn't carry hate. She didn't carry bitterness. She had carried pain for too long, and now it was time to let go. The mansion no longer felt cold. It was filled with laughter, kindness, books, music, and fresh flowers from the garden. Emma often invited children from the local school to visit, telling them stories of strength and hope. She wore simple clothes, drove a modest car, and walked barefoot in the grass when no one was looking. She had everything, yet nothing had changed. About her heart, the girl who had once been laughed at was now the woman others looked up to. She didn't chase attention. She didn't seek revenge. She simply lived with purpose. And that, more than any will or wealth, was what truly stunned everyone. Because the most powerful person in the room is not the loudest, or the richest, or the proudest. It's the one with quiet strength who chooses love over hate, grace over ego, kindness over pride. That person was Emma, and the world would never forget her.